Hello and welcome to the City Report Card with Bob Bernstein and Ashley Northington. The City Report Card is a Zoomcast where we explore Nashville through a different perspective, aside from it being Music City, It City, or any other kind of city, except the one we've lived in for a long time and seen change dramatically, and not always for the people or for the better. We decided to do this show after serving 3 years on the Chamber's Education Report Card Committee, where we learned a whole lot about how the public school district works, how it's funded, and what challenges it faces. After all the interviews, readings, and discussions, our biggest takeaway is that we cannot judge the public school district without first judging ourselves. That means we can't point fingers at public schools without taking a deeper look at all of the systems and institutions that connect to it. And that's everything from affordable housing to private industry to transit and mobility to the nonprofit sector. This is why we're hosting this series of conversations to explore the connections and the relationships in hopes that we can make a difference. So, who are we? Well, I'm Ashley Northington, and I'm what Nashvillians call a unicorn, meaning I'm actually from here. In fact, I'm a fourth generation Nashville native, and my passion for education stems from the amazing experiences I had having attended 8 Metro Nashville schools. Yes, 8. I'm a graduate of Antioch High School, a former education reporter, state education department official, education policy analyst, and now I work with educational institutions across the country, helping them to navigate their challenges and better connect with audiences. I do this work because I know the tremendous value education has had in my life, and I want to make sure that more students have a great experience. Bob?
And I'm Bob Bernstein. I too was a newspaper reporter, and perhaps that's about where our similarities end. I moved here from suburban Chicago 32 years ago to write mostly about government and tax reform. I quickly realized that I liked Nashville more than journalism and pivoted to becoming a restaurant entrepreneur, opening several places, including Bongo Java and Fido. I've had a long-time interest in politics and education. I worked on many campaigns starting when I was 10 years old, and I read education reform publications starting in college when I started to realize how my formal education failed me. And over time, I pursued these interests and gotten involved in Nashville. I was a founding board member of Hands on Nashville and Nashville Prep, and I was a board member of Nashville's Farmers Market and Avintra Montessori School. My wife Irma and I have a son at Avintra Montessori and another one who just started Hume Fogg High School this year. And today we have with us Judge Sheila Calloway, who is the juvenile court judge of Davidson County. In that role, she manages to staff 125 people and a youth detention center. She also hears cases about every day involving appeals, issues around parental termination, and requests to move a juvenile into the adult court system. Judge Calloway is a native of Louisville, Kentucky, who has been here in Nashville since 1987. She received her BA in communications and law degrees from Vanderbilt University. And after graduating, she worked at the Metro Public Defender's Office and was then appointed to the position of juvenile court magistrate in 2014. And in 2014 was elected juvenile court judge. She also serves as an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt, Belmont Law Schools, and the American Baptist College. In addition, she is and has been a member of too many legal and education boards to mention here, but I'll mention just a couple to show her commitment to children and a wide-ranging interest. She serves on the Pencil Foundation Board, co-founded a choir, and was a member of the 2000 class of Leadership Nashville, which is arguably the second best class ever. I figure you'd appreciate that. To explain why we chose her to be part of our Zoomcast, the City Report Card, I want to read a quote that I read last night in Style Blueprint from a while back. Quote from Judge Calloway: "Right now, I am most passionate about doing what I can to ensure that all youth have the same access to opportunities to be successful, particularly in the education system." So welcome, Judge Calloway.
Thank you. I'm excited about being here.
Even though you're only the second best class of Leadership Nashville.
I'm clearly the first best class. Clearly the first.
I was the class right after you, so we think you surpassed. It's kind of yeah, for those, it's an ongoing joke about who's the best class ever of Leadership Nashville. So I just wanted to start with that quote and see, I wanted you to say again in your own terms what you're so passionate about, why you're involved in how you got involved with the youth in Nashville and how you see Nashville today.
When I think about that quote and how my passion came where I am, it literally is how I was raised by my parents. My parents were both fortunately college educated parents, and they went on to have good professional careers. My mother was a school teacher for many years and then went back to school while me and my sister were in high school and got her master's in library science, and she became a school librarian. And then my father worked for General Electric, and I got to see him through the years go back and get more education, get a master's degree, get certifications, and ended up being a contracting agent for General Electric. And it was their push for us, me and my sister, to understand the importance of education and to understand that in order for us to open any doors, we had to stay educated. And it wasn't ever a choice in my family about whether you're going to go to college or not. It was, where are you going to go? You didn't have a choice. You were going to go to college, and you just had to figure out exactly where that was going to be. And throughout that, my raising from my parents, one of the things they also did is they took in a lot of strays. And, I mean that in a loving way soever. If they had a friend or somebody's son who needed just a little more guidance or something, they would stay with us for a while. If I had a couple of friends over the years that one of them, her parents were moving to Omaha and she didn't want to go. It was like her last 2 years of school. And so she stayed with us. And so they also taught me it was important to help others, no matter what their situation, that it was important to reach out and help others. And so I took that with me as I started my career. And it's so important. Working in the public defender's office, I saw so many people at the worst of their worst times. And there was so much trauma, so much, what we know now is adverse childhood experiences that a lot of my clients had. I didn't know what it was then. I just, thought, they just, unfortunately had bad luck in their life and now they're making bad decisions. But what I know now, that was part of brain development, part of adverse childhood experiences, part of their trauma, and is where it landed them in front of me as a public defender and then later on as a judge. And so what I know without a shadow of a doubt is that if we keep our youth in the schools, we keep them engaged in the education process, then there's less likelihood that they're going to end up in the criminal justice system. There's more likelihood that we're building their resilience factors, no matter what their adverse childhood experiences are, that if we keep them engaged, supported, loved, nurtured in the school system, then they have a much better opportunity to succeed. And that's what drives me. That's what drives me every day.
Yeah. So you've been here in Nashville for a while. And so you've sort of seen it grow from this little town that's been focused on country music to this bustling city that is a hotspot for businesses and professionals and families alike. How do you think that transition has affected Nashville's children?
I look and see the transition, and I'll say, being at Vanderbilt for 7 years, you're really out in the Vanderbilt community and you don't know much about Nashville. And so, but as I grew in Nashville and had all of my adult life here in Nashville, there's definitely a difference and definitely a change. And the thing that I can say is, unfortunately, we are leaving a lot of youth behind. We are leaving a lot of our kids behind. And what's happening is, we're growing as a city, we're growing as businesses, there are big things that want to come to Nashville, but we're not redirecting some of that profits into the school system. And so our school systems are stymied and not necessarily growing in the resources that they need as people start coming into our community. And so if we don't have enough resources to fully make sure that we're taking care of each and every one of our youth, we're losing a lot on the way. And so I see that in the change that has happened over the years.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of the reason that Ashley and I decided we wanted to do this Zoomcast and kind of expand what we learned during this committee time to the general public, because there's all these misconceptions that we see the city growing like this, becoming, quote unquote, the it city and all this, yet our schools funding hasn't gone up proportionally. And we live in a state and city that really prides itself and uses a selling tool that we have a low tax city. We don't have an income tax. We want our taxes low. As soon as they announced the property tax this year, there was protest. So I'm trying to figure out how you balance the need for the desire for better schools, more sidewalks, any kind of any service, city service, with the idea that we're a low tax state. And that's why we, at the beginning, Ashley said, we can't judge the schools and we can't judge anything without pointing the fingers at ourselves. So how do you, from where you sit in the dealing with the juveniles of the city, how do you hear that?
I hear it and I see it and I feel it every day. I feel, I see, it's particularly where our building is in Nashville, we see the growth. We look over and see, the millions of people that go to the Titan Stadium every day. We look and we see, across the river, the all of the businesses and restaurants and all of that have truly grown. And when you are growing your city, you're also bringing in a lot of youth to your city. And so you're bringing in families. And what's not growing is the resources that we're spending for our youth. And, I sit here in a building that we house 125 employees and a detention facility that has, an average capacity of youth that are actually in the building around 35 youth a day. And with the staff to fit that, it's about 80 staff. And our building was built in 1994, and it is so inadequate for the services that we need. And, every time that we say we need a building that's going to be able to provide multi-thematic things for our youth that come through the system, we get pushed to okay, we get it. We know y'all need a new building, but we don't have the funds to do it. And so, and you see the school system, and, I applaud Dr. Battle and the things that she was able to get done through the CARES Act funding, but we shouldn't be waiting on emergency funding to help our schools out. That funding should always be there. And what we're giving them is like the bare minimum of what they can really deal with. And so you think about all of the things that youth are bringing to the school systems. They need more resources. We need real counselors in every school. You need real nurses in every school. You need a team of psychiatrists, a team of psychologists, because it's not just about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's about learning life. And our youth are in a situation where we're experiencing all kinds of trauma within our communities, and we're not able to address it at the place where they spend the majority of their time because we don't have the resources. And so we've got, as a government, we have to figure out ways to ensure that we are fully funding our school systems and all of our programs for our youth, not just saying the words we want to fully fund, but we don't have the pockets of money. We need to find those pockets of money. We need to make arrangements like with the Music City Center that says a portion of the money that you have needs to go to the school system every year. and the profit that you make, a portion of that needs to fund our school systems. We need to say to the businesses like the Amazons and the Alliance Bernsteins that we bring in and tout their what they're going to bring to our community. We need to make a agreement with them because we don't have property taxes, or because we don't have the business taxes are lower than anywhere else, and we don't have an income tax. You need to set aside a certain amount of money to help fund our programs within the community. And we need to do a better job of connecting with our businesses and our community partners to making them understand that, yes, we would love not to ever have to have an income tax. We'd love not to have to raise the property taxes for the people who can't necessarily afford it. And so we need the business community to step up and be able to fund some of our necessary school resources.
When I was a reporter, I used to write lots of education stories, and I would talk about the disparities like funding challenges, et cetera, or why academic performance was lower for some students than other students. And I wrote all of these stories because I was like, man, if I could just get people the information, if I could just spread the knowledge, then people will act and do something, right? I was disappointed to find out that didn't necessarily mean that people were going to do anything. They could know the stuff and not care. What do you think the message is that will drive people to action, to start talking about some of the issues that you just mentioned? Like, how do we get people to actually care that schools don't have enough funding? Like, what do we need to say or do to sort of make that happen, to get people energized about that?
So we got to go where it matters to them most. And what I found as a juvenile court judge, what I get criticized or talked about or questioned on a regular basis is, what are you doing about these youth who are committing these dangerous crimes and our community safety? And so I know that everybody agrees that we all want to live in a big it city with all these businesses, but with no crime, right? We want community safety. And what say that again, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. We want everything. We want it all.
We want it all. We want it all. We want to be big and huge and, outshine Chicago and New York and have the best, music industry, have the best restaurants, have all of that with zero crime. And that's what we strive for. And I think we could do it. And that's a heartstring that you push at everybody, but we have to explain to them why spending money and resources with our youth in the school systems makes a difference with community safety. And there is a direct connection. And so what I try and do every time I'm have an opportunity to speak to people is to show them the connection. When we put in a lot of resources for our youth, we connect them to their schools, we keep them there, we keep them safe, we keep them in a space where they can discuss, the things that are on their mind, learn conflict resolution, then there's a less likelihood that they're going to want to go out and commit crimes. And the exact opposite is true. When we isolate youth, when we kick them out of schools, when we disengage them from the school system, when we suspend them, when we expel them, all of those things that we're doing to push our youth and not give them a space in the school system to feel safe, protected, nurtured, what they end up doing is they end up committing more crimes. And so there's a direct link. The school to prison pipeline is an absolutely true reality. And until we realize that and realize how we can make a difference in that, we're still spinning our wheels and the cycle won't change. And so what happens is when a kid has a bad day, let's say they're in a housing neighborhood, there's a raid on the house next door to them in the middle of the night, they hear some shooting, whatever, there's some traumatic things going on with that child. And then he goes to school the next day and he's tired. He's anxious. He's has all these emotions, and no one's really taught him how to deal with those emotions. And his brain is not fully developed, and so he doesn't know how to do it on his own. And so he goes into the school system, and the school doesn't have this particular school may not have restorative practices. They may not have a de-escalation room. They may not have de-escalation policies. All they're worried about is, making sure everybody's testing well and doing well, and that their score's going to be high. And so this kid comes in, and he's tired, he's exhausted, he's anxious, and he lays his head down, and the teacher says, we don't, sit up. We don't have time for that. We got to, get this reading, and you're distracting my class. And he's like, I don't care. I'm tired. Or he acts out. And then what happens? We kick him out. Mm-hmm. We send him to the office, or we suspend him, or we expel him, because this is the third time that he's come and been disrespectful to us. And we kick him out. And then where does he go? He goes home, right? And who's home with him? Probably no one. Because he's probably in a household where there may be just one person, one adult that has to have a job, that has to go to work, that can't, take a day off, a vacation day, doesn't have that luxury. And so they're home, they're unsupervised, they're angry, they're tired, they're mad at the school, they're mad at the world, and it becomes a criminal offense. And so why aren't we putting the resources in there from when he walks in that door and he lays his head down? Then the teacher or a restorative practice assistant can come and say, your head's down, what's happening? Do you want to go to the circle room? Right. You want to spend some time there? The schools who have done wall-to-wall restorative practices are showing us that they can not only de-escalate, reduce their suspensions, expulsions tremendously, but their test scores and their learning scores are increasing. And so it takes that extra push and that extra support and that extra resources to just change the thought process. That instead of kicking kids out, let's work with them in the school system while they're here, while we have them, and not drain the criminal system on the other side of the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the way you just described really well is on our education committee, we spend a whole year studying one particular issue. And Ashley and I, first year in the report, we studied social emotional learning. And as the woman who runs my kids' Montessori school said, it's like the academics are the easy part. It's all these other things you're talking about are the more difficult and more, to me, what I finally learned was the more important things for later in life. And so the second year on our report, we kind of came up with this concept of whole city, where it was like the school systems aren't going to get better. None of our social service or city services are going to get better until the whole city gets behind them. So in my head, I started coming up with this concept of, we've been the music city, we've been the it city. So what would happen if we just decided we were going to be the most child-friendly city? And from the mayor on down to people like you and everybody just had this notion in their head. That would start, to me, that would start to change things. So I'm just kind of want to run that. Ashley will ask about what's the messaging. That's my idea for the messaging. And you're the judge, so you judge that.
I love it. I love it. I'm judging that. I'm giving it an A, an A+. And the so importance of being a child-friendly city is it puts your priorities where they need to be. And, the three of us aren't going to be here forever. And somebody's got to take over the city at some point. And we want to have well-trained, well-adjusted youth who are able to, take it over and make it better. We have got to, and literally, and I think what we're trying to show here in juvenile court, when you put the proper resources and funding and services with the youth, and you teach them and you train them and you help them, then you don't need it on the back end. And so put the money right here, right with our schools, right with our juvenile institutes, all right, with our community organizations that work with our juveniles. And if we get it right, on this side, as their brains are developing, as they're growing into adulthood, then you don't need it because we've trained them to do conflict resolution. We train them how to treat other people. We train them in empathy. We've trained them in all those things that they need to be successful adults at an early age. I was, I guess, disheartened a little with the way. So when there was a referendum that was possibly going to be on the ballot for us to, overrule the tax increase, for the property tax increase, and when that happened, and rightfully so, and I understand, Metro government said we got to put a stop on spending because we're going to have to make if this referendum passes, we're going to have to cut a lot of stuff from a lot of departments. And so, the things that got cut from the areas that we work with are the things that we, no question about it, evidence-based programs that support our youth and that help them with the rehabilitation. And so we cut the things that are going to sustain our youth in the communities. That's a little on the backward side, right? And that just showed that we're not being child friendly. And if we're not child friendly, we're going to be, adult unsafe. And we've got to change our thinking about that.
It's kind of like solving a problem before it happens. It's like investing the resources and opportunity on the front end so that these challenges, don't show up on the back end. One of the reasons why I switched from journalism to something else was because of this. There was an instance when I was a reporter where a kid had brought a gun to school. He brought the gun to school because he had been picked on and getting into fights with other students. And so his thought was, he was a fourth grader. I'm going to bring this gun to school and I'm going to show them, right? Of course, he got caught with the gun, thankfully, and no one was injured. But the little boy, of course, was expelled. And the school board's response to that was not, oh, let's figure out how we can make this environment more conducive so the kids know how to solve problems between themselves, do conflict resolution or fight de-escalation. The school board's response was, we're going to make sure that all kids wear clear backpacks. That was the policy that was introduced. And that didn't solve a thing. It never addressed sort of the root issue. And I think restorative practices is one of those areas that addresses the root issue. Can you share a little more about what restorative practices are and how you implement them in your juvenile justice system?
Absolutely. And there's a slight difference in restorative practices that they use in the school system and the restorative justice that we use in the court system. But the core is all the same. What we're doing is we're trying to restore, whether it's a victim of a crime, whether it's the offender, we are trying to make sure that people are learning from the process, that it's not a punitive, because we don't really learn from punitive responses. We learn more from restorative responses. And so it's about helping people understand the core of why they committed an offense or why they acted out, and helping them to overcome that and learn how to deal with it in the future. And so what we see in the school system, for instance, is the schools that do restorative practices have a much better likelihood of having less suspensions, less expulsions, and less behavior issues. I'll give a couple examples of the way that we see it in the school system. So there's one school that every morning they have circle time. And so in every single class, every morning while they're having their breakfast, and let me say this was all pre-COVID. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing during COVID. And in the virtual world, I don't know how you do this, but prior to COVID, every class, every student, every teacher would be in a circle. And, one person would throw out a question. So what'd you have for dinner last night? Or What time did you go to bed? Just a very general question. And everybody in the circle would talk. And what you learned in that circle were this child didn't have dinner last night. Mm-hmm. They had nothing because of whatever, poverty, parents weren't home, whatever it was, they didn't have dinner. And so when he's a little agitated during the school day, we get it. And what they saw was the students that were in the circle with that child learning empathy. And so instead of hoarding all their food and eating it for themselves, they'd sneak them an apple, in a nice, appropriate manner. And so when everybody is talking to one another on the same playing field from the beginning of the day, then you know what you're facing for the rest of the day. I had another instance where a principal actually called me in a panic. And what happened was they had a community garden at their school. And some kids, just being kids, came and kind of like ran their bikes through the community garden and kind of destroyed it. And it really hurt the principal. And she called the police and said, I know who did it. I saw my, right. And then as soon as she did it and the police come and they want to prosecute, she's like, no. I don't want you to send them away. I just want to, that was not what she wanted to happen. And so she convinced the police officers, please don't arrest these kids. I want to work with them. So what they ended up doing was getting the kids and their parents to come to the school to have a circle, talk about it, and to figure out how they were going to cure the harm for what those kids did to their community garden. And what they did was they resoiled it. They picked a day. All of the youth and their parents came dressed, with their gloves and whatever it is that you had to do. I don't garden, so I don't know exactly what they did, but they fixed that garden. And so the youth learned how important it was. The parents are part of the process, very grateful that their youth didn't get prosecuted by the system, but instead they were able to help them learn from that process. That's restorative. That's a restorative practice that works in our school system, and it works in our criminal justice system. So for us in the criminal justice system, we have a pilot program of restorative justice where we're actually doing felony charges, including where youth are alleged to broken in someone's home, stolen a car, any type of felony charge on a youth. We're not at the violent ones yet. I'm working on that. We're not quite there yet, but mostly the breaking into cars, breaking into homes, and those kind of things. And what happens is the youth has to admit that they committed the offense. They work with an agency called Rafa Institute, which is our community-based organization that does restorative justice. Rafa also works with the victim, and they actually partner with Voices for Victims, and they counsel the victim and they talk to them about, what can help you feel better again. Someone came in and broke in your house. What are the questions you want to ask for that person who did it? Why'd you pick my house? Was it something about me? Have you been casing me? All of those things that they want to know to feel safe again in their own home. And so once they get to a point where they've counseled on both sides, they bring them together in a restorative circle along with their support system and a community-based organization representative. And so you have a circle and everybody talks about how, who was hurt from this offense, how you cure that harm from the offense, and who's going to be a part of curing that harm. And we've had several cases that have gone through the process. And so far, in the last 2.5 years of having this program, the ones that have gone through the actual restorative process have not reoffended, which is a blessing. And so we got like 0% recidivism or 100% recidivism, whichever one, they have not come back to the system, which is a blessing. And what we learn is that they become a part of a community that's trying to help them to do better. There was one, if you ever go to the website for Rafa Institute, I think it's still probably up there, but there's a story or a picture of one of the first cases that they completed where the person the victim of the offense was actually at the park with the youth that commit the offense and is now serving as a mentor for that child. Mm. And, it's a beautiful story. And, the guy was like, I could have been in this same situation as he is. And I need to make sure that he's going to understand that his choices have consequences and that we can make them be better choices. And so he's actually mentoring that child and helping that child, just do better than life. That's restorative. And that's what makes a difference. And it's a very positive experience. It's like when you grow up and you go to the store with your mama, you were like 4 and you wanted this piece of candy and you didn't know you had to pay for it, but you knew you wanted to pay candy, and your mama said, no, we're not buying candy today. And you're like, well, okay. And then you just go ahead and get it because it's in your reach and you get it. And so you go out the store and you pulling out your candy, getting ready to eat it because you're excited. And your mama says, where'd you get the candy? And you said, the store. We were just a store. And she knows she didn't buy it. She knows you didn't have no money. And so what does she do? She walks you right back to the store, and you have to give that candy back to the store person, and you got to tell them what you did, and you got to apologize for it. What did you do? You learned from that. You learned that is not what we should do. And so, our traditional criminal justice system does not give an opportunity for people to be held accountable and learn from their offense. It's all about, and as a former public defender, I know the game. It's all about, can they prove that you did it? And if you have clients that say, well, I want to testify, and you're like, no, because you're going to testify something that's not going to help your case. You just sit there and let me handle it. And they're never given the real opportunity to say, I did it, I want to make amends for it. Because it's a game of, the crime and punishment and try not to make the punishment outweigh the crime and not bringing in all the things that led up to the crime and the source of it. And so you don't get that in a traditional criminal justice system. The victims don't ever get to be heard. If a victim is testifying in a criminal trial and they say, well, I felt so scared, as a public defender, I'm going to say objection. Because there's nowhere in the statute that says how she felt is what is you have to find her guilty for. So that's irrelevant how she felt. Whereas in a restorative justice program, a person gets to say, this scares me. I'm scared to go back in my home. This is how this has affected me. And so victims become more satisfied in a restorative justice process than in a traditional criminal justice. It makes a difference. And I can't wait till our city and our whole country is ready to accept restorative justice as the alternative to fix our criminal justice system.
So is forgiveness the key? Is that the key to having restorative practices, in every part of our life? Is it forgiveness that's the linchpin of success, perhaps?
So I think forgiveness is a byproduct. Forgiveness would be great to get it, and it would be great for people to say, I can forgive, but it's not necessary to have restoration. Mm-hmm. I think the linchpin of restorative justice is making people feel whole, making the victim feel whole again. Making them have that sense of I can go forward, I can do these things again. And having the person who committed the offense to learn from that experience and learn how their consequences affected everybody else, make that person whole as well. And then a byproduct of is, at some point, maybe there can be some forgiveness from everybody, the person who was offended, to be able to forgive the person who caused the offense, the person who caused the offense to be able to forgive themselves, forgive, whatever it is that got them to a point, whether it's, domestic violence in a home or mental health issues or whatever it is on the adverse childhood experiences scale that caused them to get to this point where they're committing these crimes. All of that works together, and there can be some forgiveness.
I think what you're explaining to me, and I'm trying to be respectful of your time here. I know you need to run, but it's people want short-term and easy answers. And what you're explaining is a system that is a little more difficult up front, but it'll produce more results down the line. And to me, it's like we've been talking about. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, yet they all want the things in the long run that more resources can provide. I mean, it's ridiculous to me that say that we spend half to a third on our public schools than most of the private schools pay, and people are willing to pay that, but they're not willing to pay it for all kids. And I think you in a roundabout way, you talked a lot about this in a really great moth talk I listened to last night, True Justice, which was amazing. And I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about how your sense of justice and fairness for everybody came from your experience as a lawyer, as a young lawyer.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that moth talk. I will say, working as a public defender, you see it all. And I had the opportunity to work in front of who I believe was the absolute best judge ever, and someone that I aspired to have people to say the same things about me that they said about Judge Shriver. And he was about fairness. And I'll have to say, I didn't know Judge Shriver when he was a district attorney. They said he was really tough and really hard on crime, but over the years, he really changed his philosophy, and he really believed in giving everybody a second chance or a fair shot of being successful. And he was one of those judges who, reached out and said, what can we do to help this person? Is it a drug issue? Is it is it mental health? What is it that we can do to help get this person back on track? And I remember I had one time I had a probation violation person with him. It was like the third chance. And, I was like, Your Honor, he gets the third chance. And he gave it to me. And I was like, oh, wow. I was surprised. But, the gentleman that I was represented, really said, I get it now. I get it now. It just takes some time. And it does. It takes different people different time to recognize how their behaviors affect others around them. And criminal justice can't be cookie cutter. It can't be one size fits all sentencing. It can't be one size fits all solutions. Each person brings with them so many different just aspects of why they're there. And so anyhow, Judge Shriver really inspired me to treat people fairly and to give everybody that chance, and to not just look at the surface of what that person is charged with, but look through, that person's just heart and that person's struggles and that person's upbringing, and bring all of that to the table to figure out exactly what's going on. And that's, one of the reasons I love being in juvenile court versus my time in the adult criminal system. There's not as much leeway in the adult system to really do creative sentencing and to, really think about what is going on with that person and to get to the core heart of what's happening. Whereas in juvenile court, the actual statute allows us to do that. The statute gives the judge the ability to do whatever is appropriate for the treatment and rehabilitation of the child that's in front of them. And so we can do creative sentencing and, do restorative justice where we're not prosecuting, we're not bringing them to the courthouse, we're not putting a petition on them that's going to follow them for the rest of their childhood and possibly their adult life, but we're, diverting all the cases out into the community. So, those things we can do as a juvenile system, and it's truly making a change. I'll say since I started in 2014 as a juvenile court judge, and we've been kind of looking at trends on youth arrest. And from 2013 until the end of 2019, youth arrests were down 48%. So literally in 2013, there were like 4,000 something kids arrested. In 2019, it was down to 2,000 something. And it's COVID has done a world of a difference for our youth too. So it's going to be down significantly more than that at the end of this year, because literally there's hardly anything going on. There ain't nobody out, so can't nobody get robbed, and which is a good thing. And so we'll keep seeing those numbers go down, but it's about literally working with our youth, our communities, and getting them set up for success versus giving them failure. Putting them in the criminal justice system, kicking them out of school systems is nothing but leading them to destruction, leading our community to be unsafe. But when we put in the proper resources, we divert them from the systems, we give them the support structure, love, nurturing, caring adult figures, particularly in the school systems where we connect them and we keep them engaged, then they are going to be safe. They're going to be successful, and our communities will stay safe. We've got to just understand and recognize that resourcing our youth through our schools and through other youth organizations is the answer to turning it around and keeping all of us safe. And that's what we got to do.
That sounds like the final word.
Drop the mic.
You gotta give the judge the final word.
Yes, that is a mic drop. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. We learned a lot about your perspective and about how we can do things better. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
All right, that's it for this week's City Report. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks.